How did the First World War affect Russia? At first, the war was very popular, and there was a lot of support for it and for the Tsar. They even changed St. Petersburg's name to Petrograd because that was seen as being less German and more Russian. And there were next to no strikes in the first year of the war. However, Russia's problems soon began to resurface. The army was huge but badly trained and equipped. Soldiers were even sent into battle with no rifles, being told to pick one up from dead comrades before they reached the German trenches. In 1915, the Germans pushed the Russians back, and this cost the Russians 2 million men as well as lots of valuable land, including wealthy coal areas. In September 1915, the Tsar made himself commander-in-chief of the Russian army, made him totally in charge. But this was a personal disaster for him because he was blamed for any defeats that happened. But it also meant that he left his German wife back in charge back in Petrograd. And this, of course, made the Tsar even more unpopular. The war made Russia's social problems even worse. By 1917, there were over 15 million men in the army, mostly conscripted, forced to sign up. And these people were mostly peasants and factory workers. This made it hard for Russia to keep up with the demand for food and industrial production. And the army also took all the horses, which made it impossible for the remaining peasants to plough to grow food. So food shortages in the cities became much worse, right at the same time that 6 million extra people moved to the cities to help the war effort. The workers in the cities suffered the most because at least the peasants had a bit of food stored up. The workers had to buy their food and there wasn't any available. Between 1914 and 1916, the amount of food people ate went down by 25%, a quarter. Infant mortality, babies dying, doubled. The crime rate went up. People in the cities were very unhappy. Because of this, the leaders of the Soviets in the cities, these workers' councils, held meetings where people could go to talk about the problems. They talked about revolution, and the workers began to listen to them. The workers were no longer automatically loyal to the Tsar, because they saw him as being in charge of the army, and they blamed him for these defeats. So they began to demand an improvement to their lives. So to sum up, how did the First World War affect Russia? Firstly, the Tsar made himself commander-in-chief, which made him even more unpopular. The peasants and the factory workers were conscripted, which led to shortages in food and in equipment and raw materials and industry. And people began to question the Tsar. Why did their lives have to be so miserable? And they began to think maybe we should have a revolution. There's been an 8-mark past exam question on this. Explain the effects of the First World War on Russia in 1917. And what you need to do for that is you need to pick 2 or 3, just to be safe, different aspects of how the First World War affected Russia. And you've got to say what the effect is, support it with some information, and then explain why it is an effect of the First World War. Okay, so explain how the First World War makes this effect happen.